We are back with the Bible in a Minute, chronological Gospels edition. I cannot remember what episode this is, but we are looking at Luke chapter 1, and we're actually going to cover this whole chapter, which is like 80 verses long, but not in this video, right? That's way too much to dissect and dig into. So we're just looking at verses 5 through 7. This is what it says. I'm reading out of the New American Standard Bible, the 2020 edition. It says, "In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah. That name means remembered of Jehovah. He was of the division of Abijah. Abijah in Hebrew is Abiyah, which means my father is Yah, the first, kind of the abbreviation of God's covenant name. That the division of Abijah is the 8th division out of the 24 divisions in the priesthood. So all the priests take turns, they rotate through, and Zechariah was in the 8th division. And he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, so his wife was from the tribe of Levi. She was a Levite as well. And her name was Elizabeth, or Elisheva, which means oath of God. They were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all his commandments and requirements of the Lord. Now, let's pause there. This is important because they are righteous. They're righteous in the sight of the Lord. And I'm sure I've talked about it in a previous video, but if not, we'll do it right here, right now. The question we have to answer is, whose eyes are we right in? Are we righteous in our own eyes? Do we justify our own actions? Do we try to seek to justify our behavior based on our own morals and ethics? Or are we righteous in the sight of the Lord? The Lord gives us a book with clear commands, do's and don'ts, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, things to do, things not to do. And it's our job to be obedient. Like he is our Father, and so our job is to be obedient to those commands. And at the end of the day, well, really the end of our lives, when we are judged based on our works, the question will be, did we do what he commanded? Did we do the works that God commanded us to do? We won't be judged for salvation because we will already be declared saved, right? We're already righteous. We're already, going into eternity with the Lord and not into eternal punishment. But the issue is our works. And so those of us who are believers in Jesus Christ, our works will be judged. What are our works, right? The things we do that we're supposed to do and the things we don't do that we're not supposed to do. The good that we do. And so Zechariah and Elizabeth are righteous in the sight of the Lord. Don't miss that phrase because it happens quite a bit in the Old and New Testament, especially the Old Testament, talking about the kings in the Old Testament. Did they do what was right in their own eyes, or did they do what was right in the eyes of the Lord? And how were they righteous? Like, what is the benchmark? What's the standard for righteousness? Luke tells us in the very next phrase, walking blamelessly in all the commandments. Right? The commandments that they're walking blamelessly in are the Torah commands from Genesis through Deuteronomy. All the do's and don'ts, the 613 commandments in the Old Testament. That is the benchmark for God to declare them blameless and righteous, right? There are no new commandments at this point. The only commandments are the Torah commands. So they are walking blamelessly in the sight of the Lord and all the commandments and the requirements of the Lord. And what I think is interesting, like my family, we sit down to dinner, and almost every night I have a list of the commands in the Bible, the Torah commands as well as the New Testament commands, which, to be fair, are way stricter than the Torah commands. So we're going through those so that my boys, my kids, know what the Word of God says. And one of the commands is to recite the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4, every morning and every evening. Well, I do that. I do that as a great reminder. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And for me, the emphasis is the Lord is our God. Like he's my God. He's not my father's God. He's not my grandfather's God. He's my God. He's the God that I worship, the Lord, our God. And so we talked about that command, and my boys, with joy, wanted to obey that command. They're like, can we say the Shema? And I was like, absolutely, you can say it. And so I taught it to them in Hebrew and then taught it to them in English. Wrote it on a little white marker board that's at the base of our stairwell. So because they wanted to practice it. And every time I put them to bed, and when they wake up, when they come down the stairs in the morning, they say the Shema. They choose to do that. Like I'm not making them do that. With joy, they are obeying a command of God to recite the Shema every morning and every evening. So when I put them to bed, normally I read them a story, we do a prayer, and I tell Alexa to play lullabies or whatever that just kind of lulls them to sleep. I turn on a fan and give them a hug and a kiss, good night, and then put them to bed. And so they've started saying, "Hey, Dad, don't forget to say the Shema." So of course I do it every night, but they wanted to do it as well. And that's the thing, is like so many times people think the commands of the Lord are such a burden to do. If you do them with joy, like again, my boys want to do it. They want to be obedient because they believe that the Lord is their God just as much as he's my God. And they hold me accountable, like, hey, Dad, don't forget, like, we got to do the Shema. And it's not something that we do out of obligation. It's something we do because we choose to do. Yes, it is commanded by God, but we choose to obey that command, and it gives us joy. It gives us perspective. And so that was one of the commands that Zechariah and Elizabeth obeyed, the Torah commands: recite the Shema, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, and all of these things. And that was the benchmark for God declaring them righteous. Now, we're going to get into Elizabeth's barrenness in the next video, but I just encourage you, like, we often look at these commands and we think, oh man, they're impossible to keep. You want to talk about impossible? Jesus repeatedly took Old Testament commands and made them stricter. He said, you obey the letter of the law, but you're violating the spirit of the law. You've heard it said of old, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say, if you look upon a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery in your heart, right? So like he takes the Torah command and he makes it stricter. He makes it almost impossible to obey. If the old covenant commands weren't impossible, they're way more impossible now. And yet Christians treat like the Old Testament is the impossible and the New Testament possible. There are 1,050 commands in the New Testament. 1,050. Only 50 of those, around 50 of those came from Jesus himself, which means 1,000 of them come from Paul, Peter, James, the writer of Hebrews, etc. So you might think the Old Testament is impossible to follow, but the reality is the New Testament is way more impossible, which is why we need God's grace. Again, we don't obey the law to be saved. That's legalism. We obey the law. I obey the law. I obey the commands because I am saved. And because he's my father, he's told me what to do. And I can either be an obedient son or a disobedient son. So that's my take on Luke chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. God bless and have a great day.